Nobody hikes into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park expecting to see armed men in dark suits hauling away a strange creature. Yet that's exactly what Jacob Harris stumbled upon. He'd heard rumors about black helicopters and secret government outfits roaming these woods. One gray morning changed that forever. In a single hour, his life went from quiet birdwatching to ducking behind trees, while a clandestine team subdued something that shouldn't exist. He never dreamed he'd become a witness to the unimaginable. Yet here he was, sweaty palms gripping his backpack, and that was just the beginning. He had no way of knowing it then, but from the moment he parked at the Sugarlands Visitor Center and stepped onto the trail, his world began to unravel. Later, he'd wonder if choosing a different path that day would have spared him. Maybe he would have stayed blissfully ignorant, but fate had other ideas. Within minutes, the signs appeared. First came the footprints, huge, strangely human-like, then the unmarked helicopter overhead. Finally, a monstrous, hair-covered figure that defied logic. It all happened too fast for him to process, as his reality twisted into something more like a fever dream than a weekend hike. Jacob Harris was a creature of habit, always out before sunrise to avoid the tourist rush. Last night's rain left the ground damp, so a mile in, he wasn't shocked by muddy stretches. But when he noticed an enormous print in the dirt, wide and elongated with 5 toes, confusion gripped him. He pressed his palm against the edge of the print. It dwarfed his hand. A chill crept up his spine. He straightened, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous lurked beyond the pines. He found a second print, then a third, each spaced in a stride that dwarfed his own. They veered off the main trail into thick brush. Jacob hesitated. Going off trail in the Smokies could be trouble, especially if you met a wild animal, or worse. Still, curiosity won out. He pushed through the rhododendron, ignoring the sting of snapping branches. Every so often, he saw another giant track, leading him further from the main path. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Something big was moving. Jacob crouched behind a fallen log. Then he saw it, a towering figure covered in dark, matted hair, shoulders broad, arms swinging low at its sides. It stood upright, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. An earthy, musky odor drifted through the air. Jacob's heart pounded. He shrank behind the log, raising his phone with trembling fingers. The figure sniffed the air, took a few steps, then disappeared into dense undergrowth. Against all good sense, Jacob followed, driven by a mix of fear and fascination. As he crept to where the creature had stood, a distant rumble made him look up. To his shock, he saw a sleek, unmarked helicopter hovering above. It wasn't the usual Park Service chopper. This one was dark, with no visible insignias. A knot formed in his stomach. This matched the rumors about government spooks who cleaned up strange incidents before the public found out. The helicopter dipped lower, stirring leaves in a whirl. Jacob watched the creature slip deeper into the forest. Then the helicopter's side door slid open, revealing men dressed in black tactical gear. They scanned the ground as if searching for something or someone. Moments later, Jacob heard rustling. Several men in dark uniforms swept through the underbrush, carrying strange handheld devices that beeped. They moved with military precision, checking footprints and broken branches. Jacob realized they were tracking the same creature he'd just seen, and they were no ordinary forest rangers. He stayed low, keeping them in sight. Every step made his heart thud, but curiosity drove him forward. If these men were part of a secret government team, the question was, how far would they go to secure their target? He heard it before he saw it, a low roar that shook the leaves. The men rushed forward. Jacob dove behind a row of boulders. The creature thundered past, its massive strides sending dirt and debris flying. Despite their gear, the men gave chase, tranquilizer guns at the ready. The forest floor sloped toward a creek thick with rhododendrons. One operative fired a dart. It missed, lodging in a tree trunk. Two others sprinted around to cut off the creature's escape route. Even at a distance, Jacob could feel the tension building, like a coiled spring about to snap. Jacob followed at a distance, adrenaline spiking. The terrain flattened near a bend in the creek, forming a small clearing. A rocky outcropping blocked one escape, thick tree trunks another. The creature stood there, chest heaving, eyes darting for a way out. From all sides, these men in black advanced, forming a loose circle. Jacob hid behind a trunk, phone filming with shaking hands. The beast let out a deep guttural sound that vibrated through Jacob's bones. Rifles aimed. No one fired yet, but the standoff felt ready to explode. One operative signaled, another raised a tranquilizer. The dart struck the creature's upper arm. It roared and charged, swiping at the man who had fired. He dove aside, rolling into the brush. Two more operatives flanked the creature, guns raised but still not shooting bullets, only darts. They clearly wanted it alive. Despite the sedative, the creature moved with terrifying force, whipping around to avoid the men's approach. Jacob's heart pounded so hard he thought it might give him away. More darts found their mark, a shoulder, a thigh. Slowly, the creature's knees buckled. It let out a final ragged roar and collapsed, stirring up a cloud of dust and leaves. The men closed in with a practiced routine. Jacob crept closer, staying hidden, straining to hear. "Vitals stable," one said. "Keep it sedated," said another. They wrestled a heavy tarp under the unconscious beast, its fur dark and matted. Jacob felt a wave of horror and awe. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you called it, was real, and these guys were taking it away. Within minutes, the helicopter reappeared overhead, lowering onto a patch of flat ground near the clearing. The roaring blades whipped branches in every direction. Jacob shielded his eyes, peering through swirling debris. Several men lifted the creature onto a stretcher-like platform, struggling to position its massive limbs. Even sedated, it weighed a ton. Every muscle in their bodies strained with the effort. Finally, they strapped it down with thick restraints and carried it toward the helicopter's open side door. Jason inadvertently started talking to himself. This is unbelievable. They've got it on a stretcher. This Bigfoot, 8, maybe 9 feet tall. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. They're loading it into an unmarked black helicopter. No badges, no insignias anywhere. The chopper rose, beating the air into a frenzy, and vanished above the treetops. Jacob dared to hope the men would leave without noticing him, but 3 stayed behind to clean up the scene. Jacob felt a glimmer of hope that maybe the operatives would leave without noticing him, but that hope evaporated when he saw 3 men remain, scanning the area methodically. They retrieved every dart from the forest floor, plucked any stray evidence from the brush, and even raked over footprints. One snapped pictures on a tablet while another spoke into a device. They moved in a choreographed pattern, ensuring no trace of the confrontation would remain for random hikers to find. Jacob didn't dare move or breathe too loudly. Finally, one of the men stepped dangerously close to Jacob's hiding spot, scanning the underbrush with a handheld thermal device. Jacob's heart seized. If that thing picked up his heat signature, he'd be discovered. He pressed himself against the cool ground, trying to minimize his presence. The man lingered, device beeping softly. Another operative called him over to recheck footprints near the rocks. Jacob stayed motionless, certain that any shift might give him away. Eventually, the men regrouped. One nodded as if satisfied. They hiked back in the direction from which they'd come, presumably heading to a rendezvous point. He waited until their footsteps faded, then slowly stood. The forest looked almost normal again, yet he knew what he'd just witnessed was anything but normal. Stepping carefully, he searched for any leftover clue. He spotted a dark hair snagged on a branch. It was thick, coarse, longer than a typical animal hair. Heart hammering, he sealed it in a plastic bag. It might be the only proof that something impossible had happened here. Jacob returned to the main trail, every snap of a twig making him jump. He was sure an agent in black might pop out at any second to confiscate his phone. Or worse, when he emerged onto the beaten path, a group of hikers strolled by, cheerfully unaware of the mayhem nearby. He kept quiet, forcing a polite nod. They wouldn't believe him anyway. His heart didn't fully settle until he saw the parking lot up ahead, filled with families unloading coolers and cameras. It felt surreal to watch normal life continue after what he'd just seen. Jacob slipped into his SUV, locking the doors behind him. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, and he realized he was drenched in sweat. He started the engine and pulled out, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. No suspicious vehicles followed. Still, it took a while for his pulse to drop below a pounding beat. Gatlinburg seemed like another planet. Tourists everywhere, shops selling fudge and t-shirts. Meanwhile, Jacob's mind buzzed with images of that captured creature and the men who took it away. Rumors about black helicopters suddenly felt all too real. He merged onto a larger highway, leaving Gatlinburg's busy streets behind. Jacob reached his small rental cabin near Pigeon Forge and practically sprinted inside. He double-checked the locks, then collapsed onto his couch, every muscle aching from tension. The hum of the fridge and distant traffic felt strangely loud. He replayed the capture in his mind. The roars, the darts, the men in black calmly securing their target, no questions asked. His phone battery had dipped low, so he plugged it in and confirmed the videos were still there. The hair sample lay in his pocket. He held it under the lamp, noticing how coarse and wiry it was. He wondered where to turn. A regular lab would dismiss him as a prankster or call the authorities. Who could he trust? That night, he paced the cabin, gripping his phone. The videos showed enough to raise serious questions, though they were a little shaky and partly blurred. Anyone with half a brain would see something big and hairy, plus those men in tactical gear. He thought about posting them online, but the memory of that helicopter and the efficiency of those men stopped him. If they tracked him down, he'd be in serious trouble. By 3 a.m, he was exhausted. He set his phone on the table, watching the screen go dark, and tried to calm his racing thoughts. His life would never be the same. Over the next few days, Jacob wrestled with what to do. The men in black never showed up at his doorstep, but he felt their presence everywhere. He decided to store the hair and copies of the video in a safe place, telling no one but one close friend. After that, he quietly left the area. He never returned to that spot in the Smokies, and he never saw the unmarked helicopter again. To this day, he still has no idea who those men were or why they wanted the creature so badly. He just knows he saw something real and watched it get taken away in secret. Sometimes, late at night, he'll replay those images in his head. A massive, hair-covered figure tranquilized and hauled into a black helicopter, disappearing into the skies above the Smokies. And sometimes, once you learn a secret like that, there's no going back. It happened on July 29, 2023, just outside Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I'm a volunteer firefighter with the Mason Volunteer Fire Department over on 2nd Street. That evening, we got called out around 9:45 p.m. for what we thought was just a routine traffic accident along Route 62 near the old TNT area. Dispatch said witnesses had seen sparks and a possible small brush fire, so we rushed out there with one engine and a rescue vehicle. On the drive, I remember being unusually jumpy. Maybe it was because a few of us in the department had been talking about those weird sightings rumored around the TNT area, big winged things people swear they've seen. I never gave it much thought because we have more important things to worry about, like folks burning leaves too close to their garages or the occasional arson near the outskirts of the farmland. Anyway, we arrived on scene, and sure enough, there was a single sedan that had run off the road, but it didn't look too badly wrecked. just a busted front end and a popped tire. There was this black scorch mark on the grass, though, like lightning had struck. I remember thinking that was odd, given there wasn't a cloud in the sky all day. We started our usual routine, checking for fluids leaking, scanning for any sign of trapped passengers, that sort of thing. The driver wasn't in the car, and that gave us pause. We had no immediate reason to suspect they walked off, but it's actually not that uncommon for folks to wander away if they're in shock. Another volunteer, Cole, was with me. He told me he heard rustling off near the tree line. I told him to keep his radio on and carefully check around. He came back a minute later, looking pale. He didn't say much, just something about hearing heavy flapping in the darkness. That didn't mean too much to me at first. We get weird sounds out here. Herons, owls, big birds from the wetlands near the Ohio River. But something about the look on Cole's face made me uneasy. We continued scouring the area with flashlights. The weird thing is that the brush fire we had expected wasn't much of a fire at all, more like a singed patch of land shaped in a circle, maybe 10 feet across. I was checking the perimeter when I noticed how still everything was. Normally, you'll at least hear crickets or frogs chirping in that part of West Virginia, but it was silent to an uncomfortable degree. Then we noticed movement above the treetops. It caught my eye because the moon was nearly full that night, illuminating the outlines of the branches. There was this shape that looked like it was perched on one of the taller trees, something with a wingspan that seemed ridiculous for a bird. Must have been 8 or 9 feet across. I was about to call out to Cole, but froze when this thing suddenly launched off the branch. It glided through the air in a huge semicircle above us, silent as a ghost. It was almost like the wings were too big to be making no sound at all. Even big hawks and eagles make some noise. Next thing I knew, it swooped down behind the engine in the direction of the abandoned TNT bunkers. I couldn't process what I was looking at. Its body looked somewhat humanoid, not like a typical bird at all. The eyes, this is the detail I keep coming back to. They glowed a faint red, but not like a bright flashlight reflection. It was more of a dull, smoldering red, as if the eyes themselves were emanating this glow. I had only seen eye shine from deer or raccoons, and this was entirely different. Cole and I both saw it, and we just stood there, dumbfounded. Honestly, I nearly dropped my flashlight. I remember feeling a surge of nausea that I can't really explain. It was like my body was telling me to get the hell out of there. While we were still trying to gather our wits, we heard a shout come from the roadside. One of our other guys had managed to find the driver. They were next to a ditch, shaking uncontrollably, but physically okay. We never found out if they saw the same thing. We got the driver into the ambulance that arrived shortly afterward for assessment. By then, a couple of sheriff's deputies showed up. Typically, in a single vehicle accident, they check for possible DUI or if the person fell asleep. None of them mentioned anything about a huge winged creature. That's the part that still gnaws at me. It's like it never existed except in our heads. I thought about telling them what I saw, but something stopped me. I looked at Cole, and he gave me this vibe that we should just keep our mouths shut. Often in small towns, if you start claiming you saw some giant birdman in the dark, you'll get teased at the station for the rest of your days. When we headed back, I kept replaying the scene in my mind. I even tried to come up with logical explanations. Could it have been a big crane or heron somehow caught in the moonlight? But nothing about that shape seemed even remotely consistent with a crane. No long neck, no elongated legs grabbing at the branches, just this bulky figure with massive wings and those red eyes. The next day, I went by that same spot on Route 62 while off duty, just to convince myself there had to be a more rational explanation. The burned patch was still there, now charred black and roped off by local authorities, probably as part of their accident investigation. Meanwhile, the rumor mill around the station started up about strange footprints found in the area, but I didn't see any myself. I can't shake how quiet the surrounding forest was. It's as if all the usual nighttime creatures sensed something greater at the edge of the woods. It's made me think about all those stories from the late 1960s around Point Pleasant, stories I always laughed off or ignored. My grandpa used to go on about the Silver Bridge collapse and how some folks swear they saw a winged beast near the bridge before it went down. I never gave it any credence until now. I keep questioning every detail. How did it move so smoothly through the air? Why were its eyes glowing at all? Did that scorch mark in the grass have anything to do with it? Or was it from something else entirely? I think about how the driver ended up in that ditch. Did he swerve to avoid hitting this thing in the road? Or did it swoop down out of nowhere, causing him to veer off? It took me over a week to talk to Cole about it. We were sorting hoses back at the station when I nudged him, trying to gauge if he would bring it up first. Finally, he mentioned that he'd been having nightmares about whatever we saw. He didn't elaborate much, just that he felt like it stared right into him, even though he only caught a glimpse. He said it felt like time slowed down for a second and the air got thick. That's almost exactly how I felt, like the rest of the world just went dead silent. I still leapt at the chance to go back on calls because that's my volunteer duty, but every time I'm out at night near those bunkers, I can't help scanning the skies. I've heard rumors about a group of local investigators poking around the area at night with thermal cameras. I haven't met them, but I've thought about trying to run into them if I see their vehicles parked off the side of the road. Part of me wants to know the truth, and part of me is still rattled. It all started late in the evening this past September, on one of those unnervingly silent desert nights. I was on duty at a small makeshift clinic just off Kelbaker Road, southeast of Kelso, California, near the edge of the Mojave National Preserve. You probably never heard of our place, and frankly, most people haven't. It's basically 2 old mobile trailers retrofitted to handle basic medical cases for folks passing through, plus a small staff area where we sleep on cots if it's a busy night. It normally doesn't get too wild, mostly dehydration, sunburn, cuts from cacti, the occasional scorpion sting, that kind of thing. I'd been here a few months, ever since I decided to step away from the hustle of LA. I wanted to volunteer somewhere off the beaten path and found a listing through a friend of a friend who works park services. The drive alone, cutting through Baker before eventually winding down to this lonely outpost, can be a meditative experience in itself. Desert roads at night always unnerve me a bit, but I've grown fond of it. This particular evening, I was starting to doze off when I heard the sound of a truck engine outside. It startled me because nobody had radioed ahead, so I got up and tried to straighten myself out, although I wasn't fully awake. The headlights were so blinding they flooded right into the waiting area. I remember fumbling to find a pen or chart because I thought maybe it was a family with a sick kid or an elderly hiker, but there was only one silhouette stumbling toward the door, hunched over in a way that made my spine tense up. A guy walked in. Didn't look local. Rugged, dusty, disoriented. He said something along the lines of he'd had a run-in with something out near the old T&T Ranch ruins, which I later confirmed are off some back dirt road, mostly known only to hardcore explorers around here. He was dripping so much sweat I initially thought he might be dehydrated. He mumbled that he'd been scratched or bitten. He was holding his left forearm tight against his chest. There wasn't much blood, at least not that I could see through the stained fabric of his jacket, but the way he was shaking had me on edge. I led him to our single bed in the exam room. We don't have fancy equipment, just some standard medical supplies, a small fridge for the basics, a generator that runs lights and AC when it feels like working, and a rudimentary first aid kit with a few extras. As I tried to peel his jacket away, he kept insisting that they were still out there. I figured maybe he was delirious or had been in a fight, but I couldn't get a clear picture because he wouldn't stop glancing around, as if expecting something to burst in at any moment. When I finally got a look at the wound, I had to take a breath. It was a series of parallel lacerations running diagonally across his forearm, like claw marks but oddly spaced. It didn't resemble the typical marks from a mountain lion or coyote, and I've unfortunately seen those before at this clinic. This was deeper on one side and almost tapered on the other, like something had raked across him with a single motion. The edges seemed slightly discolored, almost greenish yellow, which made me suspect maybe some kind of venom or allergic reaction. The flesh around each laceration was raised in ridges, as if something with scales had grazed him. He mentioned in a shaky voice that he noticed an odd shape skulking along the abandoned ranch's perimeter fence. At first he thought it was a stray dog or maybe a coyote. Then he realized it stood on 2 legs. He said it was tall, thin but muscular, with some kind of ridge around its skull, like a lizard, but bigger, with elongated limbs. He kept referring to it as some reptilian thing. I was trying to remain calm, but inside I was thinking about all the desert folklore, stories of strange sightings near old mines, the rumored secret tunnels out past the mountains, and occasional chatter about reptilian beings underground. I've always dismissed those rumors, chalking them up to tall tales or internet conspiracies. But seeing those gashes, I started rethinking a lot of my skepticism. Before I could even process his story fully, I noticed that the man's jacket pockets were stuffed with dusty Polaroids. I couldn't help but glance at them as I worked to clean his wound. Most were overexposed or water damaged, but a few showed what looked like a collapsed building and large footprints embedded in the dirt. I asked him indirectly if those footprints were from the creature, and he nodded, saying something about how no boots would make prints like that. 3 long toes, a narrower heel, a pattern like scales. The strangest part was when I applied antiseptic. The man let out a yelp, more from surprise than pain, and said it felt like acid on his skin. I've treated plenty of deep wounds, but never saw one react that way to a standard antiseptic swab. The edges of the cuts fizzed slightly, like a mild, effervescent reaction. Even after I rinsed with saline, the edges glistened unnaturally, as though the tissue was partially translucent. It wasn't bleeding much. It was more like a thick, dark fluid seeping out. I actually had to double-check our supply kit, thinking maybe something was expired or contaminated, but everything was up to date. It took me a good 2 hours just to get the wound dressed to the point where I felt comfortable enough to let him rest. I strongly recommended he go to a larger facility in Barstow, or even Baker if it was an emergency, but he was adamant about not involving hospitals. He kept repeating that if the government found out, they might make him vanish. Now this is the moment I normally roll my eyes, but the fear in his eyes was real, and I've heard from locals about black SUVs showing up whenever someone stumbles onto certain old testing grounds or weird entrances in the desert. I've never taken it seriously, but I know the Marine bases around 29 Palms and the federal land that stretches out here have their share of secrets. I stepped outside for a moment to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. The night was dead quiet. No breeze, no insects, nothing. My flashlight illuminated a semicircle in the pitch black, and I got that prickly sensation that something was watching me. I swear I caught a flicker of movement near the Joshua trees about 50 yards out. Could have been my imagination, or maybe a coyote, but it was tall, and it moved back behind a rock so fluidly that my stomach sank. I retreated inside and locked the door, something I almost never need to do. I felt ridiculous, like I was overreacting, but better safe than sorry. When I went back to check on the man, he was dozing in a feverish state. I ended up setting up a small IV line for hydration. Throughout the night, he'd shift, mumble, occasionally jerk awake. He kept repeating that there's more than one. At one point, he described them as wearing something like tattered cloth or maybe camouflage that blended into the desert. He said they had eyes that reflected moonlight like a snake's would, but bigger and more intense. He mentioned an underground chamber near the ranch, some half-buried structure with cryptic markings on the walls, symbols he swore looked Mayan or Aztec. But this is north of anything that would typically be connected to those civilizations, so it underscored how bizarre the whole scenario was. By sunrise, he was desperate to leave, insisting he couldn't stay because they'd track him. He thanked me in a rushed, hushed tone and peeled out in his old truck, heading south toward Amboy Road, or so I guessed by the direction. I tried calling out for him to at least keep the wound dressed and watch for infection, but he was gone before I could confirm. I've thought about contacting the rangers or local authorities, but I don't even know what I'd report. A man with weird claw marks who said reptilian monsters attacked him is not exactly standard protocol. I'm reaching out because this entire experience rattled me in a way I never expected. I know you discuss these kinds of accounts on your YouTube channel, and I figured if anyone's heard something similar, you would have, or at least you'd point me toward any resources or previous encounters people might have documented. The desert has all sorts of lore, but seeing those wounds up close and the haunted look in that man's eyes has me thinking about stories of secret bases, underground tunnels, and reptilian sightings that pop up now and again. I always dismissed them as fantasy until that moment. It's been a few weeks now, and I can't shake the feeling that I witnessed the aftermath of something truly out of the ordinary. I have no way to contact the man. He left while half delirious, and there's been no sign of him. Every so often, when I'm on night shift, I scan the darkness outside the window, half expecting to see something hunched by the Joshua trees, watching. I have no explanation for those lacerations and the reaction the antiseptic caused. I have no rational explanation for the footprints in his photos, but I can't deny I saw them with my own eyes. That's basically the whole of it. I'm not sure what else to add, except I'm trying my best to keep a level head. If it was just a mountain lion, that wouldn't explain the weird fluid, the shape of the wounds, or the man's absolute terror, and those Polaroids with the tracks, 3 toes, scaly ridges, as if something straight out of a cryptid documentary were wandering around the Mojave that night.